What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you my first impressions of Redfall, the open-world FPS action-adventure from Arkane Studios that is releasing today technically, but due to time zones, yesterday evening for us in the US here. And so far, as first impressions go, I'm pretty mixed on the title. I would say overall it's doing some things I enjoy, other things not so much. Right at the beginning here though, obviously I did not get a review copy for this. However, I did want to mention that I got the game for free when I upgraded my graphics card. NVIDIA was actually giving away copies of it with sales of 40 series at the time. So when I bought my 4090 recently, it came with a copy of this, which I kept in my back pocket in case I didn't get a review copy, which is of course where we're at. Which does of course mean that I'm playing this on PC for those interested in that information. But let's kick things off with the technical side of things. I've seen some reports of people having poor performance with this, but personally I haven't had too many issues with that. For the most part, the games run very smooth for me outside of one specific section of the island you can run around on, which is the sort of main town, or a sort of downtown area of the town, I guess I should say. And in that area, I experienced some stuttering, but otherwise it's been very smooth on a 4090 and a 13900K. Though outside of performance, some of the glitches and bugs, I guess you could say, I've been running into have been things centered around the combat, with enemies behaving very strangely and the occasional very janky animation, especially when you go to execute vampires. And at least for me, that's about as much as I can say in terms of how the game is actually running. So from there, let's actually dive into a few other details. We're going to be playing as one of 4 heroes. You pick one right when you click on New Game, as we try to fight off the vampire invasion of Redfall, which has trapped everyone on the island under a few varying circumstances for our main heroes. And while you can play through the game entirely solo, it is co-op as well, should you so choose. And while I believe right now it's technically online only, they did state previously that they were working on an exclusively offline single-player version, because the game is definitely playable as a single-player game, so the online requirement was a bit odd. Each of these heroes, though, has a few different abilities, 3 specifically, and then beyond that it's just a bunch of more generalized skills. As you play through the game, complete quests, defeat enemies, you'll be earning experience, and upon leveling up you'll earn skill points, which then you can spend on your particular abilities. But because each character really only gets the 3 different abilities, for the most part a lot of these characters play very similarly in terms of what's available to them with guns, etc. But on top of that skill point progression, there is also loot progression. Our weapons will have both rarity and levels associated with them, so there is a bit of a loot element there to it. And from what I've experienced in the first few hours, you're going to be changing weapons pretty often, as there are quite a few different types. But both you and your weapon have a bunch of cosmetic options available to you, outside of the ones available from the Bite Back edition, or basically the upgraded version that comes with the Season Pass also has some cosmetics associated with it for each character, but other than that, they all look like they are available in-game. And now we can move on to the slightly more interesting stuff. So a short ways into the game, we liberate a fire station, which becomes a sort of central hub for you and other survivors, upon which you'll be taking on missions, which then send you out into the open world proper after the prologue. Now, when it comes to actually exploring the island of Redfall, I do enjoy both the art direction and the atmosphere itself. The art direction is stylized realism, I believe it's called, so they weren't exactly going for photorealistic here. That does make a few things look a bit odd as a result. Nonetheless, I enjoy that, and I do think it helps with the atmosphere, especially when the game world is at nighttime, which is when the game's lighting and colors I think are at their best. Though even during the day, you'll still run into vampires and things due to what they've done to the sun around here apparently, but there is a day-night cycle. And as you run around town, you will be completing a variety of objectives, both the main story, side quests, as well as securing neighborhoods. The initial section of the map, at least, is divided up into 5 neighborhoods, in which you need to track down and secure a safe house, which will then open up missions specifically in that neighborhood, which allow you to fight off the vampire menace. But so far, these seem pretty short and sweet, with them ultimately culminating in a boss against a sort of head vampire in the area known as an underboss. And after that vampire is dead, the neighborhood is considered secured, which looks like it just means that the quests are done there. In addition to that, though, you can also find some side quests laying around. I've only found a couple so far, so we'll have to see how that goes. Now, for the main story, while I'm not particularly far in, it does seem like that's where they're putting a lot of attention in terms of approaching the game how you would like. So while I actually go to review the title fully, I'm going to be keeping an eye on how these story missions develop, because it certainly seems to imply that there's going to be multiple avenues for each individual story quest, and I'm curious if that actually amounts to anything or if it's more superficial. Which brings me to the last point I want to make for this first impressions video, and that is the combat side of things. The combat, I think, is the weakest part overall, which is weird because both the movement and actually shooting the guns and everything feels pretty good. The problem is that enemies are erratic, I would say, to put it mildly. Their behavior is very inconsistent. Sometimes they just stand still and do nothing, which means you can just walk right up to them and kill them. Oftentimes they'll get stuck on terrain even when they are trying to attack you. The exact range on the melee hits for the vampires seems really weird, and honestly a couple other issues, but the result of all that is that most of the enemies don't really feel like much of a threat because you can easily outmaneuver them. And even now that I'm a few hours in and I'm starting to run into different types of vampires, it all starts to feel very samey very quickly, and that's made a little bit worse by the fact that a lot of the vampires share the same character model, which feels especially off when you get two of the same character model vampire in the same screen with you. So again, while a lot of your movement and the guns themselves can feel really good to play with, the rest of combat really doesn't feel like it nails the details, which I would say is probably my biggest gripe personally, at least so far. And ultimately, as far as first impressions go, I think that about sums it up. Again, for me, it's just very mixed at the moment. On one hand, I really enjoy the atmosphere and the art direction, but the game's letting me down pretty hard in terms of the combat, and the jury's still out on the main story as well as the broader exploration. I just haven't seen quite enough of the island to really make up my mind on that yet, because so far I've hit the very formulaic open world part of it, but I'm curious if I dive a little deeper, if there's any secrets to be found, that type of thing. Basically just how rewarding exploration winds up being, and that combined with whether or not the story does anything interesting with, say, branching paths through various story missions is really what's going to, I would say, make up the crux of my opinion when it comes to the actual review, because the game makes a very mixed first impression. So that is what I've got for you. I'll save the rest for the review, which I think will probably be up like Friday or this weekend. This one's going to take me a little longer than Jedi Survivor did, as the beginning of the week is always a little busier for me than the later half. All of that said, I certainly hope you enjoyed this video. If you're playing Redfall, by all means, let me know what you think about it. I'm also curious to hear how people feel about this being a Game Pass title, and if the ease of that entry point helps you out with your opinion at all. But that's it for me today. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz, but regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.